In the worship folder, just by way of announcement, we're going to be doing a retreat in second weekend in October 13th and 14th. We're going to talk about the 4 signs of spiritual life in the retreat context. I think it'd be a tremendous retreat. Opportunity to be able to get away, and when you've gone for there's a night and then the next day, you have a chance to process some things that you wouldn't be able to process if you had shown up at maybe several different events over the course of a couple of weeks. It seems like more stuff gets to sink in. So we're going to be talking about authenticity. What does it mean to be authentic? We'll be looking at the stuff that we deal with, honestly, and you'll come away thinking, gosh, I don't know other people dealt with that stuff as well, but authenticity is when you don't try to pretend about what's happening. Confidence is what happens when you learn that even in light of what you're like, you can still be certain of divine support. Confidence that God cares. When you do those things and you learn to look at that, you become transformed, and that leads to service. So we're going to look at those 4 things. It'll be a tremendous retreat. We're going to, in previous years, we've been able to register up until maybe a week before, but we can't do that. So the registration deadline is in about a week and a half, the 27th of September. And so we encourage you to take advantage of that. By way of announcement as well, briefly, Doug Anderson and I will be taking off for China on the 27th. We're going to be making another trip for 2 weeks there, and Doug will be doing what he has been doing. I think this is 12 trips, 12 or 13, I'm not sure which one. And he will be connecting with business people and teachers who are from other countries in China, and he goes there to support them and to help them to deal with the things that will enable them to stay there and to have the kind of influence they want to have. I will be going to do a conference with 150, 200 teachers and business people in the city that I stayed in Tianjin, and then I'll also be going to another city to do some really fun things with church leaders who are Chinese. So be gone from the 27th. We'll be back 2 weeks after that. But this morning, we're going to talk about when I'm stressed. Modern life is full of pressures and fears and frustrations. It's stressful. We race against deadlines, sitting in traffic, arguing with your spouse. All these kinds of things make your body react as though it's facing a physical threat. The reaction gives us the opportunity and what we need to be able to deal with something that threatens us, and it's been one of the reasons why we've been able to survive as people. Stress serves a purpose when it provides us with the motivation to scale new challenges or overcome difficulties. It can help us to do something and have energy to do things that need to be done that we wouldn't have had the energy for if we didn't have the stressful response. Stress becomes harmful, though, when it's not in line with the severity of a situation. When we are in a life-threatening situation, a stress response is very helpful. However, when we're not in a life-threatening situation, but our body is generating a stress response because of accumulated, maybe smaller things that we deal with, it begins to have a harmful impact on us, and it can have a harmful impact physically on our work, our social life, and our spiritual life as well. If continually activated, stress response makes us vulnerable to life-threatening health problems. We can develop skills that will help us to deal more effectively with stress. Part of it comes with identifying what its sources are. That's why today we'll talk about the signs of stress. And then next week I'll talk about the sources of stress. Where does stress come from? What are the things in our life that promote stress? We'll talk about how not to cope with stress. Mark Lauritsen will be here. He said he's the poster child on how not to cope with stress. That would be a great week. Mark will come up and tell us some ways not to handle stress. Then J.C. Chambers will tell us how to handle stress. That's where we're going in upcoming weeks. Let's talk about the signs of stress in particular. I've included on the back of the worship folder, there's a little questionnaire that I got off the Avera McKinnon website, which you read the different checklist. You assign a value of 1 to 5 next to each individual item. 0 to 5, excuse me. So it says, I have a lot of worries at home, at work, or both. If that's never true, you put a 0 beside that. If it's between never and sometimes, you put a 1, 2, 3. Between sometimes and almost always, a 3, 4, or a 5. And then what you do, you add that up at the end once you've gone through all the individual items. And as they describe it, 34 or under, your stress level is pretty low. 34 to 65, when you add up all those things, lowering your stress level would be beneficial. 65 to 85, think seriously about changes in your life to reduce stress. 86 or above, you need to act now to reduce stress because it's most likely having a harmful effect on your functioning and on your health. So you might want to do that and not show somebody else if you're stressful, because that will make you stressful. Different kinds of stress: acute stress or chronic stress. Acute stress is a fight or flight response, and it's the body's reaction to a threat, challenge, or scare. And our body goes into a stress response sometimes even before we have the opportunity to think about it. My dad was driving through a town right next to a town in Saugus, Lynn, Massachusetts. Lynn's kind of a rough town. A lot of seedy parts of the town, kind of violent. My dad was driving down the street. There was a guy in a car that he stopped to help. The guy indicated that he had a problem and that a car had been abandoned and needs some help. The car was just across the street over on the other side of that hill. And my dad walked with him and wanted to help him out. So he crested the hill. And at that point, before he even was aware that he was reacting, his body tensed, he turned, and he got ready for a blow. Somehow, and that's what the stress response is like. It picks up cues and reacts so immediately that my dad was able to sustain the blow, but he also was able to reach down. He'd been working on his boat, and he was able to reach down, and he was groggy, and pull out a knife that was on his calf and kind of wave it, and the guy backed off at that point. The stress response is immediate. And it enabled him to sustain a blow, to keep his concentration sharp. And in that sense, an acute stress response is very helpful. You hear about people who in a moment of stress can do incredible things. You hear about individuals that there was somebody trapped under a car and went in and were able to lift the car. The stress response can do that. It's a body's rapid and automatic switch into high gear, and it's easy to see how this is helpful when responding to a physical threat. You receive the energy, the speed, the concentration, and agility to protect yourself or to run as fast as possible. And here's the way it works. When a threat is encountered, we're not going to talk a lot of biology here, but a little bit. When a threat is encountered, there's the hypothalamus, it's a tiny region at the base of the brain, sets off an alarm system. The hypothalamus, when sensing a threat, seen, smelled something, sets off an alarm system in the body. It prompts the body to release a surge of hormones. Two of them are real important: adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline ends up increasing the heart rate, elevates the blood pressure, and boosts energy supplies. It puts our body in a place where it's ready to take aggressive action, again, either towards the threat or away from it. Cortisol increases sugars in the bloodstream. It enhances the brain's functioning, increases the availability of substances that repair tissues. And so a stress response allows your body to heal itself more quickly than when the stress response is not activated. It suppresses the digestive system and other non-essential processes. It's like the body turns off systems that aren't important, turns on systems that are important in order to deal with the threat. And the process is self-regulating. Once the threat passes, the body returns to normal functioning. And this can be triggered not only by physical threats. So my dad, when he kind of was aware of danger and he responded to a physical threat, psychological threats can also set off the same alarm system. Deadlines at work, relationships that are in jeopardy, major life changes, the illness or death of a loved one, all these things can set off the same type of stress response as well. Many of our modern stressful circumstances, unlike physical threats, tend to be prolonged. And what ends up happening is this stress response, which is really necessary and helpful when dealing with short-term immediate threats, when it keeps running and keeps running, that's when acute stress turns into chronic stress. And that can be harmful over a long period of time. Acute stress is a fight or flight response to threat. Chronic stress is long-term exposure to acute stress. And that can have harmful impacts. The long-term activation of the stress system, overexposure to these hormones that flood into our bodies, the cortisol and the adrenaline, can disrupt the body's processes and cause a couple things, digestive system problems. Stomach aches are common. The stress hormones, what they do, they slow the release of stomach acid and they slow the emptying of the stomach. So, since digestion is not a major issue if you're dealing with your life, stress hormones shut that system down. And so, stomach acid doesn't go to the body and the food just kind of sits there. Stomach aches, therefore, are common. It kind of sits there. Diarrhea, we don't want to talk much about this. It's not a polite topic of conversation in churches on Sunday morning. But the same hormones stimulate the colon, which speeds the passage of its contents. So, when someone says that something scared said contents out of them, there is a basis in fact. That is, in fact, what the hormones do, moving very quickly. Hormone-induced changes also increase appetite, can cause weight gain. Digestive system, the immune system. With chronic stress, some features of the immune system are suppressed, making us susceptible to infection. Again, if you're getting ready to endure a blow, the body doesn't want to focus on fighting infection at that point. So it minimizes the investment of the body to do that. Other features of the immune system with chronic stress can run unchecked and increase the risk of diseases in which your immune system actually attacks your own body. So sometimes chronic stress, you can become more susceptible to infections and even cause your body's immune system to turn in on itself. The nervous system. With chronic stress, certain byproducts of the hormones act as sedatives. They can contribute to an overall feeling of depression. Again, when these hormones are pumped into your system because of chronic stress, it adds as our body sedates itself. And there is a depression that can occur, sleep disturbances, loss of sex drive can happen, loss of appetite, vulnerable to certain personality or behavioral disorders. There are brain cells that are important in memorizing data, and even those can be adversely impaired. That's why stress can be accompanied by memory loss, inability to remember things. That some of us who have grew up in very stressful homes might find that we have lacked the capacity to recall a lot of things that other people seem to be able to recall. I don't remember where I was when I was 3, 4, or 5. How do you remember what you were doing then? And some of us in more stressful places, the ability to hold on to memories was suppressed because of overactive stress response. Cardiovascular system, blood system. Stress hormones increase heart rate and increase blood pressure. And that's something that happens. So you can imagine then with the stress response activated that continues to spike. Interestingly enough, I heard that that there's a little bit of a difference between men and women. When a man's stress system is activated and a woman's stress system is activated, they've found that women tend to be able to come down from stress more quickly than men. However, men tend to be, their stress response system is activated It takes a little bit slower to activate it, but it takes slower for it to dissipate. So here's what this looks like. You might get in a disagreement, and maybe the woman gets a little bit more agitated more quickly. Boom! Heart rate, blood pressure. The guy's mellow until he gets going. And then his system goes up, and he starts to feel, and then the woman gets past it. She's fine. What are you wearing? And the guy's still. And that seems to be a basis in fact that we have a harder time coming down, and which is great for the kids, because then the mother can attend to the kids. But if it was just dads, come here, so that wouldn't be really good. Can have a number of different things then. The chronic stress can impact our body's ability to function. So again, what's good for short-term threats can be problematical for chronic stress. I read just a little excerpt, said one research showed that 65% of illnesses in some way can be connected to stress. I've heard before it's only stress. And when you hear that, you get the sense that, oh, gee whiz, it's just in my head. But I hope you see that stress causes your body to secrete hormones, secrete chemicals, change the way it functions, shuts down the stomach, speeds through the colon, and it does all these things. So stress is not just something in your head. It's something that affects the way your body functions. And when we put our body on high alert, it starts to wear it down. When we think of individuals in the Bible that have stressful lives, the person that comes to mind, Moses. You've taken trips. Just think about this. You're taking a trip. You don't have a lot of time to pack. Okay, that's the first thing. You end up being late for the trip. So you don't have time to be able to put all the things together that you want to put together, plus the fact that you have to take this small car. And you can't put a lot of things in the car anyways. I remember once I had to go to Florida, a quick trip when I was in college, and we went in a Chevy Vega. There were 6 of us. And I sat on the hump in the middle of the back seat for 30 hours. Stressful. Imagine then that you are taking this trip and then you have in the car a bunch of whining kids. Okay, you got this so far? And you get lost. Did I mention that the kids are whining? They're whining. The longer you go in circles, and you're going in circles. You go by a town. We went through that town 3 hours ago. Did I mention that the kids are still whining? It's in the middle of the night, no stores are open. And the kids want something to drink and something to eat. Multiply that times a couple million people and 40 years, and you have the life of Moses. He led the Israelites through the wilderness. They had to get out of Egypt quickly, only take as much as they could carry. They went on a trip that they had to hike. They didn't even get to sit in the back of a Vega. They had to hike and carry their stuff along with them. They went through desert expanses. There were oftentimes situations where they didn't have enough water, and you're the ones in charge. Moses had a stressful life. What's remarkable about him is how long he was able to maintain control. Toward the end in the 39th year of this journey, the Bible describes an occasion when he lost it, and that's what we're going to look at. Why did he lose it? The thing I want to look at, the first 39 years, and we don't have record of him losing control. Now, it doesn't give us a blow-by-blow description of his life, but by and large, he did really well for the first 39 years, and there are millions of whining people accompanying him. Let's look at why he stayed in control, and then look at why he lost control. First of all, let's look at Moses in control. What the verse says, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. Why was Moses able to stay in control? I think we have a couple clues here as to what kind of person he was. Number one, we see that he had commitment. What it says, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. Sometimes we take the easy road. We take a path that might be good in the short term, but bad in the long term. When we were in China, Marcia's folks were in a position of poor health, and something had to be done. Her health wasn't all that good, but she might have been able to endure, and we decided together that the long-term wise decision would be for her to be able to give the kind of support her parents needed. At that point, we made that choice. Then she came back from China in order to help her folks relocate from one town to another, and in order to be able to provide assistance with getting some medical care. And that's a decision, looking back, that she will like. I think Moses was of the same caliber. What he did the right thing, not the easy thing. Sometimes when we choose the easy thing to do, not the right thing to do, it pays off in the short run, but we end up having second thoughts in the long run. Somebody who's lived the entirety of their life for self gets to the end of life and sees, you know what, I've never done anything for anyone but myself. I read a story, don't know if this is true, I think it might be, about a woman whose husband was that type of person. Never did anything except just for himself. Just lived for himself year after year after year. I believe this was in New York City, and they lived on the second floor of this apartment in New York City. This man passed away, and he was cremated. And the woman took the ashes and put them on the mantle. One day she noticed that people outside the apartment, it was winter, they were slipping on the ice. And she said, by God, you're going to do something for someone. And she took out the ashes and dumped them out so the people could have footing. Moses wasn't like that. He did the right thing, and he had commitment, lived a life of sacrifice and investment, had character. Look what it says about him. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. He had character. He was a person who was able to endure some hostility because he identified himself with people who he knew he wanted to support and advocate for. I think that's a sign of good character. Somebody who's willing not only to take a more difficult road, but also to stand up for someone who needs support. Moses was like that. He was a man of character. Sometimes people climb the ladder of success only to discover the ladder was against the wrong wall. And Moses wasn't like that. He didn't just, again, live for himself. He took the right road, and he served the interests of other people. He was also had courage. Look what it says. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He put himself in harm's way in pursuit of doing what was right. Commitment, character, and courage. I think this had something to do with why Moses did the things he did and why he was able to stay in control. But I think we have to dig deeper. Because here's what the verse says. He persevered. What does it say there? He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. He had conscious contact with God. Oftentimes you hear people say, if you are courageous enough, committed enough, and have enough character you can experience conscious contact with God. So be courageous, be committed, be a person of character, and you'll experience conscious contact with God. That's backwards. What we find with Moses, he experienced conscious contact with God. And because he experienced that, he persevered and was a man who was committed, a man of character and a man of courage. So I might encourage you, as part of the lesson from what we take from Moses, continue in the direction of cultivating conscious contact with God, which means spending time with Him. Don't just try to be a more courageous person or a person of greater character. Try to be a person who's getting to know God better, which will mean spending time getting to know Him. You're already doing that this morning, but continuing past a Sunday morning. Get a Bible. Begin to read in it and try to understand this God. Why? Because you want to understand and have contact with Him. And what you'll find, conscious contact with God leads to becoming committed, a person of character and courage. So, if we to put this into equation, commitment plus character plus courage do not lead to conscious contact with God. Conscious contact with God leads to commitment and character and courage. But Moses lost control. Let's read, find out why. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, "Take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of that rock for the community, so they and their livestock can drink." So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded him. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock?" Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock twice with his staff. Water gushed out, and the community and their livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." What's the problem? God said, "Speak to the rock." Moses came out from the presence of God, said, "Listen, you." God didn't tell him to say this, but he said it. "Listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock?" And then rather than speak the rock, he hit it twice, and God brought forth the water, but judged Moses and said, "You were in a leadership position, and leaders are held accountable, and therefore you're not going to be able to go into the land." Here's my question. Why did he do that? Why do you think he did that? Here's a guy who for 39 years, and this is the 40th year, well, that makes sense. Chronic stress, maybe? Chronic stress? Whining Israelites. You have to pick up your belongings, go from point A to point B. You don't get to settle down. Moving's stressful. You never are sure of where your next meal is coming from. That's stressful. Having to make decisions all day, that's stressful. Year 1, 2, 3, 38, 39. Maybe he just got, "That's all I can stand," and he snapped. And he wanted to take out a piece. "Listen, you rebels." Maybe that was it. I think that probably was part of it. I don't think it's the whole thing, though. I want you to listen to this. It's a situation that happened earlier. Most of the time, the pattern of how God dealt with Moses followed this pattern. And listen, and then we'll identify the elements. We'll look at how this situation, where he hit the rock twice, there's something different about it. I want to see if you can pick it up. We'll talk about it. But here's one of what happened countless times in Numbers 11, verses 1 and 2. Now the people complained about their hardships in the hearing of the Lord. That happened commonly. And they complained to Moses, and God heard. Okay, the people. So that's what we find first. People complain, okay? And when God heard them, His anger was aroused. Okay, God's anger. Happened all the time in the wilderness. The people complain about hardships, lack of water, lack of food. Moses' leadership. They complain to Moses. God gets angry, and we find God's judgment. Look what it says. Then fire from the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. Different things happened to the people. Sometimes it was a plague. At one point they complained about food. All we have is this manna. Like Keith Greed talks about, manna, banana bread. And there's only so many things you can do with manna. And they're tired of it. And they say, we want meat. And so God gave them meat, but judged them, and the plague broke out. And that's what you find often. The people complain. God takes the complaint personally, and a judgment ensues. And then, here's what we find. Moses, when the people cried out to Moses, he prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. You got that? Here's kind of the way it worked. The people complain, God gets angry, God judges, and Moses steps in the middle. And he says, God, don't judge them anymore. And then it changes. Now look what we have here. It looks a little different. There was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition. So the people complain. We have that. That's the same, right? People complain. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down. The glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord said to Moses, take the staff, and you and your brother Aaron gather the assembly together. Speak to that rock before their eyes, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of that rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. Well, this is a little bit different. God's intervention. No anger here, right? No anger. No judgment. No rocks are going to fall from heaven. We don't find that here. God says, okay, Moses, here's what I want you to do. I want you to speak to the water, speak to the rock, and give him a drink. Follow along. So what ends up happening? So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence, just as he commanded. He and Aaron gathered the assembly together in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, and he gets angry. Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of the rock? Then he raises his arm, strikes the rock twice. Water gushes out. The community and their livestock drink. Moses is angry. Here we find not God's anger. Moses is angry. Here's a question. Why is Moses angry? What do you think? Here's what happened before. People complain, God gets angry. God judges, Moses steps in the middle. Here, the people complain, God intervenes, dispatches Moses to meet the need. Moses gets angry, and God ends up judging Moses. What happened? What happened? In the other situation, God accepts Moses' influence. God accepts Moses' influence. God is doing something. Moses, God, I know I matter to you, and therefore I ask that you would turn your wrath away from them. And God says, okay. And Moses is fine. God accepts his influence. Look at this situation. I think it feels different to him. And I think it gave him some problems. It's almost as if God disregards his influence. Moses, you don't have to be the savior this time. All you need to do is just to be the servant. You just get him a drink of water. But I think Moses probably feels taken for granted. I think he probably feels disregarded. I think he probably felt like the older son in the parable of the prodigal son. I think that's probably what he feels like. God, I'm the one who has been doing these things. I'm the one who's been honoring you. And I kind of wish you'd get angry at them. And I kind of wish I had to step in and save them. I think Moses feels disregarded. And while he knew God to be a God of miracles, he saw God do all kinds of things. You know what I think he feels here? I think he wonders if God cares about him. God always accepted his influence. God was always looking and dealing through him. Now it's almost as if God is looking over him. I think there's something in there for us. I think that's why Moses struck the rock. I think he felt disregarded. What I find, when we feel like there's people that care about us, it's easier for us to face threats without striking out. When we feel there's somebody there for us, when we feel like we're supported, it's easier to face difficult things if you feel supported. But when you feel alone, when you feel abandoned, when you feel like no one accepts my influence, no one is listening to me, no one is looking at me, no one is asking my opinion, no one is taking my needs into account, when that happens, I think our ability to deal with threats becomes less. We find ourselves lashing out at others, striking out with words or with blows. Or we find ourselves striking at ourselves, pouring contempt inwardly. Why are you such an idiot? You find yourself saying that to yourself? Or saying it to others, blowing up at others, blowing up at yourself? I wonder if we can learn something from Moses. I wonder if it might take the edge off if you leaned into the fact that God cared about you, because he says it out loud. Now, some of you might say, Mike, that doesn't matter, that's irrelevant. Oh, no, it isn't. Remember what we saw this summer? Actions come from attitudes. Attitudes come from thoughts. Thoughts are about how God feels about you. My sense is this: the greater our capacity to believe that we're cared for, that we are regarded by God, the more patience we find ourselves being able to exercise towards ourselves and others, and the less we find ourselves doing things that are hurtful to ourselves or others. But it begins with a sense of being cared for. The Bible says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. If I were to be able to inventory, when Jesus gave an image of what a stressful life is like, he gave an image of a mule with a load of goods on its back. I want you to picture a mule, and it has this huge stack of burdens. And when you see the mule and it walks, the stack goes, whoa, whoa, and it kind of sways. God says, Jesus said this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. You feel like that mule. You feel like the load of the world is on your back. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. You know what rest is? Not the absence of a load, but the presence of a manageable load. Not a whoa, but a load that can stay there. Jesus said, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and gentle in heart, and you'll find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. I think what he's saying is summed up here. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. If I could picture the load on your back, what would it look like? Some of you filled out the inventory, and it's big, and stress is large. You've got a huge load on your back. You can do two things with that burden. You can keep it, or you can cast it. You can keep it or cast it. You can try to give it to others, but that never really goes to others. It ends up coming back to you. You understand that, right? You try to give it away, it comes back. You can cast it or keep it. What God says to you, cast all your anxiety on me because I care for you. So here's the thing we'll end with. As you feel the weight of your burdens, gaze intentionally at the care of God for you. You say, what will that do? What good will that do, Mike? It's irrelevant. God can't help me solve my problems. What is he going to help me do about my checkbook, my checking account? Looking at God, you might find an ability to breathe. That ability to breathe might take your brain level down to a place where you can think not just in black and white. You might find yourself thinking a little more rationally. being a little more able to use the different parts of your brain, I think it has huge relevance. Do you understand that God cares for you? I think Moses didn't feel it. That's why he hit the rock. I think you hit each other and yourself because you don't feel it either. That's why I do. Do you understand that God cares for you? Do you understand that God cares for you? Can I ask you to lean into that and look at that? He cares for you. For you. As you start to get that in place, what that starts to do, stay with that. You'll find an ability to start to take some of these things off. God, can you take that? Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Let's stand for closing prayer. God, thank you for just how you don't want to leave us alone. Life is stressful. That's a fact. We can't get rid of the stress. We just have to deal with fast life. But we don't have to deal with it alone. You just say you care for us. Would you teach us, help us to develop a greater capacity to believe that? To know that you care for us so that we could cast our anxiety on you. Ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. Next.